I didn't grow up wanting to be a foster parent. I grew up wanting to be the kind of person who could fix things if I ever had the resources. That's probably the more honest way to say it. When I came into money in my early 30s, something in me shifted. I had spent most of my 20s feeling behind. Suddenly I had time. I had space. I had this quiet panic that I needed to do something significant with it. It embarrasses me now how quickly I jumped to save the world. I didn't call it that. I called it responsibility, opportunity, giving back. But if I'm being honest in here, it was also about not wanting to be the guy who just upgraded his kitchen and bought a boat. So I signed up for foster training. I remember sitting in that conference room with 12 other people. Mostly couples, a few older women. I was one of 2 single men. The caseworker kept glancing at me. I felt defensive about it, even though no one said anything outright. I made sure to ask thoughtful questions. I made sure to nod at the right parts. When they placed Alex with me, he was 5, small for his age, huge eyes. He didn't cry when the social worker left. That should have been a red flag. Instead, I told myself he was resilient. He had already been in 3 homes. I didn't know that until later. At first, all I knew was that he lined up his shoes perfectly against the wall the first night and didn't ask for help brushing his teeth. He kept watching me out of the corner of his eye like he was measuring something. The file said his parents were unstable, substance issues. Volatile relationship, temporary removals before. I remember thinking I could provide consistency, structure, predictability. I bought him a nightlight the second week because I noticed he kept turning the hallway light on after I went to bed. I didn't say anything about it, just swapped it out casually. He didn't comment, but he stopped turning the hallway light on. There were issues. He wet the bed for almost a year. He would lie about small, strange things, whether he'd brushed his teeth, whether he'd finished homework, even when it didn't matter. Once he smashed a lamp because I told him no more TV. It wasn't a dramatic tantrum. It was quiet. He just picked it up and dropped it, then stared at me like he was waiting to see what kind of man I was going to be. I did not yell. I think I was proud of myself for that. I told him we don't break things in this house. I made him help me clean it up. I didn't send him away. I didn't call anyone. Later that night, he sat on the edge of the couch near me, but not touching. That became his thing, proximity without contact. People would say I was good with him. Teachers did. The caseworker did. He responded well to me. I told myself it was because I was calm. Maybe it was just because I was a guy and he hadn't had one who wasn't chaotic. There were school meetings where I was the only parent. I'd sit in those tiny chairs and feel both out of place and oddly solid, like I'd stepped into a role that fit. I didn't date much during those years. I tried once. She said she admired what I was doing but didn't want to build something that could end abruptly. That's the phrase she used. I remember thinking that was the whole point, that foster care was temporary. I didn't realize how much that word would come back around. He stayed until he was 12. 7 years. We had routines. Saturday pancakes. He liked them burned a little, which still makes no sense to me. He'd pretend to hate when I checked his homework but would bring it to me without asking. He joined soccer 1 year and quit halfway through because he didn't like being yelled at by the coach. I didn't force him to stay. I told him trying something and leaving was still trying. I don't know if that was good parenting or just me avoiding conflict. There was one earlier moment that should have warned me how this would end. When he was 9, there was a school field trip form that required a parent signature. I signed it, obviously. The office called and said they needed the biological parent's signature. I explained the situation. They apologized but said it was policy. I remember holding the phone and feeling displaced. That's the word, like I was renting a title. I didn't say that out loud to anyone. When reunification with his mother became a serious conversation, I told myself it was the goal. That's what foster care is for. She had stabilized, supposedly, housing secured, job lined up, court approved. I met her twice during that process. The first time she barely looked at me. The second time she thanked me in this flat, controlled way that didn't feel like gratitude so much as obligation. I could sense something territorial under it. I probably had some of that too. The day he left, he packed quietly, same as when he arrived. He hugged me, but it was brief. I told him I'd always be here if he needed anything. I meant it. I also believed we'd stay in touch. I had this naive idea that 7 years counted for something permanent. It didn't. Within weeks, communication filtered through her, then slowed, then stopped. When I texted him directly once, she responded from his phone, telling me to respect boundaries. I remember reading that text and feeling heat rise in my chest that I didn't know where to put. I told myself it was understandable. She wanted to reclaim her son. I was the temporary placement. That's how it works. Still, I had basically raised him for a third of his life at that point. I stopped fostering after that. People asked if I'd take another placement. I said I needed a break. The truth is I couldn't stomach being erased again. I told myself I'd done my part. I donated money instead. It felt cleaner. 8 years went by. I didn't follow him online. I tried not to check. I dated a little. Eventually married. My wife knows about him in broad strokes. She's kind about it but doesn't fully get what those years were. Then I got an email. The subject line was just "Hi." It took me a second to recognize the address. When I did, my heart did this strange lurch I hadn't felt in years. He said he was in college, that he needed a copy of his birth certificate for a driver's license application, and wondered if I still had it in old records. He wrote like a young adult. He thanked me for everything back then. I responded, probably way too fast. I told him I'd look for the documents. I asked about school and what he was studying. I tried not to sound overeager. We ended up exchanging a few emails, then a couple of texts. He said things were mostly okay, that his mom and he had their ups and downs, but nothing dramatic. He was studying engineering. I felt this ridiculous swell of pride reading that, like I'd had something to do with it. At one point he mentioned he'd been diagnosed with a brain tumor. He wrote it casually, almost as an afterthought, said it was benign. The doctors said they were monitoring it and it wasn't a huge deal. I told him I could help with medical bills if needed. He declined, said insurance was covering most of it. I pressed a little. I offered to come visit. He said he was busy with midterms, but maybe over break. I tried to stay measured. I didn't want to scare him off again by being too much. We texted a handful more times after that. Small follow-ups, classes, our inside jokes, and then the replies slowed. At first I told myself college kids are busy. I waited a few days before sending another message. No response. A week passed. I sent another. Short, hope you're doing okay. Silence. I didn't want to be intrusive. I didn't want to recreate whatever tension existed before, but something felt off. I told myself not to overreact. People disappear into their own lives all the time. Still, one night I found myself opening Instagram. I hadn't followed him, but his profile was public. And that's when I started seeing posts I didn't understand at first, photos of him, old ones, captions about missing him, dates that didn't line up with anything he'd told me. I scrolled, confused, trying to piece together what I was looking at when I saw the word aneurysm and the date. Earlier that month, I sat there trying to reconcile that with the last message he'd sent me about midterms, and I kept scrolling. At first I thought I had misread it. I clicked into one of the posts. A girl had written about how sudden it was, how no one expected it. There were comments from people saying they couldn't believe he was gone, dates from 2 weeks ago. I went back to our last text. It was dated 3 weeks ago. He had sent me a picture of a campus building and said something about hating group projects. I made a stupid joke about it. That was it. I refreshed his page like that might change something. More posts. A black and white photo of him smiling. A link to a memorial service that had already happened. It listed his mother. Extended family. Teachers, friends, there was a section thanking those who supported him throughout his life. It didn't name anyone individually beyond family. I wasn't there. No one reached out. I checked my email again. Nothing. No missed calls. No voicemail. I don't know what I expected. I hadn't been in his daily life for 8 years. I wasn't a legal parent. I wasn't even a consistent presence. We had reconnected for maybe a month. Still, my chest felt tight in a way I haven't felt since the day he left at 12. I showed my wife the Instagram page. I couldn't get the words out at first. I just handed her my phone. She read quietly, then looked at me in that careful way people do when they don't know how much you're allowed to feel about something. She said, "I'm so sorry." I nodded. I didn't cry. Not then. What hit first wasn't grief. It was disbelief mixed with this stupid logistical thought I should have known. If he had a brain tumor, even benign, maybe I should have insisted on more details. Maybe I should have called instead of texting. Maybe I should have been more than polite. Then anger crept in, and I hated that it did. Not at him, at the situation, at the fact that I found out through strangers online, at the fact that there was a memorial and I wasn't even aware it existed until after it was over. I zoomed in on the program again, like my name might appear if I looked hard enough. It didn't. I started replaying the foster years in a way I hadn't in a long time. The bedwetting, the lamp, the Saturday pancakes. The school meetings, the first time he called me by my first name instead of sir. The way he used to sit near me on the couch but not touch. 7 years is not nothing. But legally and socially, it becomes nothing very quickly. I considered messaging his mother. I even typed out a draft, but I deleted it. I didn't know what my place was. I didn't know if contacting her would look like I was trying to insert myself into something that wasn't mine. He wasn't mine. He never was. But for a long stretch of his life, I was the one making sure he brushed his teeth. I was the one signing permission slips, even if they sometimes called to correct it. I was the one sitting through fevers and parent-teacher conferences. And at the end, I was just some guy from back then. I kept opening our last conversation, reading it for tone, looking for clues. Did he sound off? Was there something in the way he wrote about the tumor that should have alarmed me more? It said benign, monitoring, not a huge deal. An aneurysm wasn't even the same thing. I Googled the difference at 3 in the morning, like understanding it would change the outcome. The next day, I found myself going into my office and opening the old file box where I kept his paperwork. I don't know why I still had it. His kindergarten drawing was in there. He had labeled me by my first name, himself, and a blank circle where a third figure should have been. I remember asking him about it back then. He shrugged and said he ran out of space. I sat on the floor holding that drawing and finally cried and felt almost embarrassed. My wife asked if I wanted to go to the cemetery. I didn't know where he was buried. I didn't even know if he was buried. The memorial post didn't specify. I realized how little I actually knew about his life after 12. I knew he went to college. I knew he studied engineering. I knew he had a benign tumor, that's it. I started to feel something uglier under the grief. I felt excluded. And that makes me sound selfish, which I probably am. He died, that's the central fact. A 20-year-old kid with his whole life ahead of him. His mother lost her son. His friends lost their friend. My pain isn't comparable in scale, but it's real. What bothers me more than anything is how quickly I slipped back into the mindset I had in my 30s, that I should have been able to fix something, that I should have been useful. When he emailed me for the birth certificate, I felt validated. I won't pretend I didn't. It felt like proof that those 7 years weren't erased, that when he needed something foundational, he thought of me. And then he didn't need me for the biggest thing that happened to him. He didn't tell me the tumor was serious. He didn't tell me if it changed. He didn't call when he was scared if he was scared. I don't know if he was. I keep circling back to that, and I don't like where my mind goes. It goes to thinking I should have been informed, that I should have been at the memorial, that someone should have reached out. But why would they? On paper, I was a temporary placement from childhood. I keep remembering the school office telling me I wasn't the parent signature they needed. I thought I had made peace with that years ago. Apparently, I didn't. The money part makes this worse. When I first started fostering, I told myself I was using my resources for something meaningful. When I stopped, I shifted to writing checks instead because it felt safer, less risk of attachment. Now I'm sitting here realizing that money never bought permanence. It bought opportunity. It bought time. It didn't buy a permanent place in someone's life. I've thought about reaching out to one of the friends who posted. I haven't. I don't know how to introduce myself. Hi, I helped raise him from 5 to 12 but wasn't around after that. Sounds pathetic written out. There's also this part of me that is angry at myself for reconnecting at all. If I hadn't opened that email, if I hadn't replied within minutes like some overeager uncle, I would have never known about the aneurysm. I would have assumed he was living his life somewhere, maybe annoyed at me for being too intense. Ignorance would have been easier. Instead, I got a brief window back into his life, just long enough to remember how much I cared, and then it closed permanently. I keep thinking about the last thing I said to him. It was mundane. I didn't say I was proud of him. I didn't say I loved him. I didn't even ask for a phone call directly. I kept it light because I didn't want to scare him off. That restraint feels stupid now. I don't know what my role is in grieving him. I don't know if I'm allowed to grieve loudly, or if this is something I'm supposed to process quietly, because technically I wasn't family. I do know that when I picture him, I don't picture the 20-year-old from Instagram. I picture the 5-year-old lining up his shoes. The 9-year-old smashed a lamp and waited to see if I would explode. The 12-year-old hugged me quickly before getting into his mother's car. I keep wondering if he ever talked about those years, if he remembered them as stability or just as another temporary stop. The worst part is realizing that a lot of my identity back then was built around being necessary, being the steady one, being the guy who didn't leave. In the end, I was left twice, first by circumstance, then by death. And what I'm sitting with now isn't just grief. It's the uncomfortable understanding that I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted to matter in a way that was permanent and visible. I did matter for a while, just not at the end, and that's what I'm having trouble accepting. Follow-up. I need to correct something about the way I told this story before. I wasn't angry that he left me. I never hated him. If it came across like that, that's on me. When I wrote before, I was raw, and I think some of that pain came out sideways. It sounded like I was accusing him of abandoning me. I don't believe that. I don't know what he went through in those 8 years. I don't know what his relationship with his mom actually looked like. I don't know what his health situation really was beyond a few sentences over text. I filled in blanks with my own hurt, and that wasn't fair to him. After I found out about the aneurysm and the memorial, I sat on it for a couple of days. I didn't message his mother right away. My wife was the one who said calmly, "If you don't reach out, you'll regret that more than any awkwardness." So we wrote a short message together, not claiming anything, just that I had recently reconnected with him, that I was deeply sorry for her loss, and that I had cared about him for many years. My wife read it before I sent it to make sure it didn't sound like I was centering myself. She responded 2 days later. The tone was stiff, formal. She thanked me for what I had done during that period of his childhood. She said the service had been small and family-focused. There wasn't an invitation list beyond close relatives and current friends. It wasn't cruel, but it wasn't warm either. I'll admit, I bristled at parts of it. My wife squeezed my hand while I read it. She kept me from replying immediately. She said, "This isn't about you being acknowledged. This is about a mother who lost her son." That helped. I wrote back and asked gently where he had been laid to rest. I said I would like to pay my respects privately if she was comfortable sharing the location. I didn't mention the 7 years. I didn't justify myself. I just asked. She didn't answer for another week. When she did, it was just the name of the cemetery and a plot number. No extra words. We went together that weekend. I didn't expect it to hit me the way it did. Seeing his name carved into stone made everything final in a way Instagram posts hadn't. I stood there for a long time. My wife didn't rush me. She didn't try to manage my reaction. She just stood a few steps back and let me be whatever I was going to be. I cried in a way I hadn't before. I told him I was proud of him. I told him I was sorry if I ever made him feel like a project instead of a kid. I told him I never stopped caring. On the drive home, my wife said something that shifted how I've been holding all of this. She said, "You keep focusing on what you didn't get at the end. You're not looking at what he chose to give you." I didn't understand what she meant at first. She said, "He didn't have to reach out. He found you. He opened that door. That wasn't an accident." I've been turning that over in my head. The birth certificate, the driver's license. He was 20. What 20-year-old doesn't know how to request one? And the license, most people get that at 16 or 17. It's possible he didn't, or his documents were a mess. But it's also possible that wasn't really the point. I went back through the emails. The first one was short, yes, but it wasn't rushed. It was careful. He mentioned details about the old house that he wouldn't have needed to mention if this was purely transactional. He asked how I was. He remembered things. The request gave him a reason to contact me without it being emotionally loaded. If I'm honest with myself, if he had just written, "Hey, I've been thinking about you," I might have panicked. I might have overanalyzed it. The document request made it practical. And then he stayed in contact beyond that. He didn't disappear after I sent the copy. I keep wondering if he already had what he needed. If the license story was just a bridge, he knew about the tumor. He told me it was benign. That might have been true at the time, or it might have been complicated in ways he didn't want to unpack over text. I don't know how much he understood about his own risk. I don't know if the aneurysm was completely separate, but what if he had some sense that things weren't stable? What if reaching out was his way of closing loops quietly? Not in a dramatic goodbye way, just tying off threads. I don't want to romanticize it. I don't want to rewrite his motives to soothe myself. But it matters to me that he contacted me at all. He could have left those 7 years in the past. He didn't. My wife said something else that stuck. She said, "You think you only benefited from those texts. You don't know that talking to you didn't give him peace too." I hadn't considered that. I've been so focused on what I lost that I didn't consider what he might have gained from reconnecting. Maybe he wanted to know that part of his childhood was real. Maybe he wanted to confirm that someone from that time still cared. Maybe hearing me say I was proud of him mattered. I don't regret reconnecting anymore. The pain is still there, but it's different. It's grief, yes, but also gratitude that he didn't let our story end at 12. I went back to the cemetery alone once after that first visit. I just sat there and talked again. This time it wasn't about what I didn't get to say. It was about thanking him for reaching out. I was hurt. I was confused. I filled in blanks unfairly at first, but I don't believe he abandoned me. I don't believe he owed me explanations. I don't know how his mother held him when he was little again. I don't know what their final years looked like. That's theirs. What I do know is that for 7 years I was his safe place, and for a brief stretch at the end, he chose to reopen that connection. Maybe the birth certificate was just a reason. Maybe the license was already in his wallet. Maybe the real reason was simpler. He didn't forget me, and he wanted me to know that. That's enough for me now.